Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Today, we're going to have a bit of a back to the future in retail technology, looking back as far as 2010 versus expectations of today. And to help us with that, and he's put a lot of thought and reflection into it, is Michael Grange. Hi, Michael.
Hi there, Simon. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So you've recently founded your new company, Parker Vise, which aims to deliver simple solutions to complex problems. I like that as a strapline and statement. For people that don't know you, be good. Tell us a bit about yourself, what you've done historically, and your kind of aspirations for the new business.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Simon. So it's really about providing both virtual CIO services, which is obviously very topical in today's world, but also business consultancy to businesses that are looking to overcome those real gnarly problems that they've been suffering from a while, and where they're really looking to, as you say, get a simple solution to that that's lean, it's agile and cost effective. I mean, my background, I guess most notably was spending just over 7 years at Tesco. So working in the technology team there, and I was lucky enough to work across the store ordering area, so very much around sort of aggregating the store forecasts for product ordering across the store estate, and through their proprietary system, bringing that stock into store just in time, of course. Then I moved into distribution, so looking after the logistics and distribution side of the business across the UK, and then finally into retail, and that's where it really got exciting, where it expanded into a group role, so looking after the Tesco technology for the group. I didn't cover off a few areas, I must admit, so just in case any of my ex-Tesco colleagues listen to this podcast, I'm sure they do, then yes, I must be honest that I didn't look after all areas of retail, but I did have the broadest portfolio, which covered everything from the queue monitoring cameras to store reporting to deli scales to workforce management and productivity systems, multi-purpose computers, and this goes on. It's really quite diverse, but it was a really exciting time. After that, I went into the vendor side and worked with some companies that certainly you'll be very familiar with in that space, providing technology to retail around the world. So very exciting time. I've then since spent some time in logistics, just kind of really, I guess, reinforcing my experience of what I had and what I started at Tesco. And now I've come sort of full circle, and now I'm kind of in that place. I feel completely equipped with lots of experience and some great successes to my name and to my team's name. And now very excited to help take some of that out to other businesses.
Amazing. Well, yeah, we look forward to working with you in the new venture and seeing what we can do to support you and vice versa in both ways. And a good journey. It's amazing how many people come from certainly the big supermarkets with a good background of working across all those different parts of the business that then move into that more tech-led or consulting world. So they must all be doing something right to produce some great people.
Absolutely. And it's a funny thing, actually, because as I was doing my research for today's podcast and looked back at some of those technologies that were being talked about in 2010, I could remember many of those. We were discussing them quite often as part of the innovation that was going on in the retail technology space for Tesco stores. And then as you look at what's being talked about, even at the beginning of this year, we'll touch on some of those later on in this podcast. It's very strange that the same things are coming up time and time again. It really felt back in 2010 that we were on the cusp of delivering some of those very exciting innovations and some very exciting technology for the customers. But for one reason or another, they didn't quite make it to store. Certainly didn't make it to the consumers. And so hopefully, I'm very hopeful, I've got my fingers crossed that in the next 10 years, we'll start to see how some of that tech, some of those solutions get to help to benefit the consumers.
Cast our minds back then to 2010 and we were all full of optimism. I'm sure England were on the brink of winning the next World Cup or something like that as ever. The world was not dissimilar to today. We've had a few challenges in between, haven't we? But by and large, from a retail point of view, there was that feel of there's lots of exciting new stuff to come. So when you cast your mind back, what things did you see that were on the horizon in 2010 onwards?
It's a funny time, actually. I think just to take everyone back to that period in their minds, we all have to remember that we just come out of what's being called the Great Recession, which really was, a huge economic meltdown globally for business and for individuals too. And it was a really significant dip in the progress that was being made across industry. It really took everyone back quite a few steps. So you've got to think that 2010 was kind of the year after that finish. So I think widely it's sort of considered that 2009 rather was when the Great Recession pretty much kind of finished, and we started dealing with the fallout of that. And when I look back at a Gartner report from their Retail Tech Trends report from 2010, it's very interesting. They look at a number of areas that are really super important for retailers when they're thinking of making strategic decisions. So let me just run through a few of those that would have been in the minds of the retailers when they were making decisions about what to do at that time. Cost containment was absolutely key at that time. So that doesn't mean that budgets were frozen, and they absolutely weren't. There was still a significant amount of investment in retail technology at that time. But you had to be able to show a clear return on investment. So these decisions that were being made, these investment decisions, were only being taken where there was clearly some kind of return on investment. And I think at that time as well, and what seems to be being drawn out from the Gartner report is that there had to be real tangible benefits, less around the kind of soft and fluffy, softer benefits that customers might feel from a particular investment. This had to be real hard cash coming back into the business. And it's completely understandable why that would have been the case, given what happened in the prior years. Saying that, though, customer centricity was still a very hot topic, and putting the customer at the heart of everything you do is something that actually I've always had drilled into me at Tesco, and continue to foster as a way of working. And it's something that was certainly sat at the center of businesses at that time. So customer centricity, and really it means that when you're thinking of making a decision about something, you ask yourself the question, how is that going to benefit the customer? I mean, that's kind of the simple way of being able to determine whether something would qualify as being customer centric or not.
And do you think that causes tension when what might be right for the customer might not drive a clear or tangible return on investment?
Yes, there's certainly going to be some conflict there, and I think when you look at that decision-making process, you would hope that the investments that you're making for your customers will bring a return on that investment, but probably not straight away. So it's something that tends to come further down the line. So I think it's very much about sort of investment for near-term gain or return, or investment for long-term gain or return. And when you think of cost containment, strategic driver for retailers, like I mentioned a while ago, their focus there was very much around real hard cash, how to get that return as quickly as possible. Very bluntly, how do we get money back into the bank again? When you look at the customer-centric side, what you're really doing is about fostering brand loyalty, trying to build a retail brand that is attractive to consumers, somewhere that they're going to want to keep coming back to time and time again. And actually, to quote Walt Disney, and I've used this in a few presentations in the past, he says, make the customer experience so good that not only will your customers want to come back again, but they'll also tell all their family and friends about it too. And that's really the customer centricity investment. But it is a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing. So I think that's the conflict that would have been going on then, is do we need money in the bank, or do we need to try and build long-term loyalty? And of course, both those things are important.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's interesting. I agree.
And the next one there really is around, that come up in the Gartner report, is around this pent-up. So we had lots of pent-up frustration around wanting to deliver solutions for customers, wanting to deliver solutions for our store colleagues. And unfortunately, in 2010, we still had to wait for a few more years before that investment was going to be unlocked, and before that degree of caution started to drop, so that we could make some really exciting plans going forward. So that pent up demand remained there, unfortunately. And then the final piece that they pick on is incremental innovation. And this is really where retailers at that time were experimenting, engaging with customers and in new and exciting ways. This might sound a bit old hat as I mention these now, but this is what was going on 10 years ago. So retailers were starting to use Facebook, Twitter, and sort of, if you like, consumer-led online portals within which to engage with consumers and try and build that brand loyalty. I mean, I particularly remember that the social media team looking after Twitter back then used to come out with all sorts of, witty replies and responses. And there were quite a few across a number of retailers around the world that were showcased online. And it's, I think it's quite sad actually that has mostly declined now to almost nothing. You might get a response from a retailer these days, but it could take you a couple of days to get that response, unless it's coming from a bot of some sort. But back then, it was really seen as a way of connecting with consumers. And so, yes, there were sort of incremental, low cost innovations going on back then, but nothing of the sort of scale that we'd really hoped would come through in some of those technology areas.
It's interesting, like you say, certainly the social media thing, that you'd get almost an immediate response, or there was people sat there monitoring. I'm sure most people listening will be on social media. Now all that seems to get picked out is where you've got some creative colleague who's responding, or that what some of the responses have been disastrous. So it's kind of each end of the spectrum that you see in the press now, with some great response to a customer query or complaint, or actually one that's horrific and has really dropped the company in it further. So all that middle ground you never see.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's right. And it's a shame, isn't it? I think retailers made a real splash back then on social media platforms. And I think consumers liked it. I for one, enjoyed it. And those that I spoke to also enjoyed those responses. I suspect that we haven't seen the last of that. I think that will come back, but it will come back in the form of automated kind of chatbot responses that would have been programmed to have some degree of personality to them. And that's going to be quite an exciting time. Chatbots themselves have come on a long way over this last decade, and there's some really exciting solutions starting to develop out there. That actually, and I came across one just yesterday that's based in the States, and they claim to be able, I've not tried it out yet, but they claim to be able to respond to customers' dialogue effectively through sort of learning algorithms. Okay, so instead of the typical approach, which is a very kind of scripted, it's a very kind of network structure to the script. So, you start at one point where you say hello, then it's kind of what's your query about, and then you can imagine how that decision tree then, as you flow down through the dialogue, the decision tree is then driving the responses from the chatbot. What they've developed is something that's much more AI centric. So effectively, you can imagine it sort of sits at one level. And then because of what it's learnt in the past, it's able to tailor its responses accordingly using machine learning and AI. And that is quite an exciting step forward, because I think that's when you can really start to build in things like personality. We won't, of course, get away from the need, I think, to attach a health warning to those online chatbots. So we humans will still want to know that we're talking to an AI bot, rather than thinking that we're talking to a human that's actually an AI bot behind the scenes. And that's something that I don't think is going to go away. You
can quickly tie those current AI bots up in knots if you start to deviate from the paths.
Yes.
And you tend to notice when it's a would you like to speak to an agent option comes up, they've clearly run out of branches on the decision tree that you're not conforming to. So that's always
absolutely
good fun.
right. I found I was engaging with a brand recently. I won't mention the name because it's not a great success story, this one, but and they hadn't delivered great customer service to me, so I thought I'd go via the help and support link on the website. It took me to the chatbot, And as I'm working through the dialogue, I suddenly realized that if I typed in the word agent, I could avoid the rest of this dialogue with this artificial human, if you like, and I could go straight to connecting to a real life person if I just type the word agent in. So there's a little tip for you: if you find yourself getting tied up in knots yourself, then just type the word agent in. That might shortcut the decision tree.
Good. So what else was happening in the teens?
I think there was in store particularly, and just thinking about it from the employee side of things, the colleague side of things, there was a real want to embrace mobile technology. And you've only got to think that, it was back in those days that we all had smartphones. We were all getting very excited about the apps that we could download. The app stores were quite prolific at that point. There were lots of manufacturers like Motorola and lots of others that were coming up with smart mobile devices that were robust, that could be used in a store environment. And those were quite good. But the problem with robust devices is that they don't look very sexy. And you've got to think at that time, what Apple was doing with its products was really forging ahead with a design of technology that was very visually appealing. Okay, so it was very sexy to use, and you felt good when you were using it. You liked other people to see you using it. That's essentially what the Apple brand is all about, and it worked very, very well back then. So what was needing to happen then in retail was this idea of bring your own device. And I'm using a term here that actually I've not heard uttered in years. No one has actually mentioned that phrase to me in absolutely years. But of course, BYOD back then was a really big thing. Companies were putting together policies for their colleagues to sign that said, if you bring your own device in, then we have to have technology kind of control around it and technology measures around it to make sure it's secure. And there were all sorts of other concerns around the bring your own device thing as well. But what it meant was that if I had an Apple product, I could continue using my Apple product, and all I could then do is just kind of download the apps to my device, and that would allow me to do things like provide better customer service, do stock checks, that kind of thing. And so that was a really big thing that was going on back in 2010 that was helping store colleagues. Alongside that was a lot of technology investment going on into workforce management, which I know is an area that you particularly specialize in and in and around productivity. And there was a lot of investment going on in stores at that time, trying to find smarter ways to work in store. So sort of identifying colleagues by the groups in which they work in a store. So from a functional perspective, and then trying to say, okay, well, what's the best way in which we can optimize that workforce? Now, you can do that, of course, on paper and pen. I can tell you that's was being done at that time in many retail stores, paper and pen, and sort of every week they'd kind of overlay a new sheet on top of last week's, and then they'd kind of draw up the rota again. But really, as AI started to take shape back in 2010, there were solutions coming through from some very big company names, solutions coming through that were enabling retailers to be much smarter about the way in which they manage their workforce. Did you see much of that going on back then as well, Simon?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back, actually. It was everything from my point, because where was I at 2010 at Boots? So it was all about automation, I think. So certainly from a workforce management point of view, it was this holistic view of you feed a load of data in, you press a button and it gives you this magic answer. And
yeah.
I suppose we'll come on to later in the podcast how that's evolved. So It was about gathering data, putting it in, automating as much as you could. Yeah, I think the Apple thing's interesting. That was the first real time tech for me was led without a big user guide or manual. I don't ever remember owning an iPhone and thinking, I need to look how this works. You could work out how to turn it on. You could work out the flow, the navigation, took you through the process of the stuff you needed to know. Nobody ever told me how to download an app from the App Store. Nobody ever told me what the App Store was.
No.
And that continues, doesn't it, with modern technology today. If you need a big user manual for it, if it's a enterprise worldwide product or phone, you've probably got it wrong. If it's niche, I get it. But yeah, that first bit into, wow, someone's created something that I don't need to read anything about. I can kind of work it out and I can't really break it if I get it wrong. It was interesting, as well as the whole, let's automate the hell out of everything and take all the thinking off people. That was interesting at the time. And I think the bit we didn't realise was you kind of taking the ownership and the accountability, and power is the wrong word, but you'd empowered people to make decisions, and then you said, but this computer knows better than you.
Yes. And actually, don't you think that was also where, and I mean, I'm thinking about store reporting in particular, that was where retail wanted to get to, or I should say retailers, they wanted to get to a point where, and I remember a real energy around this in Tesco at the time, where the reporting was not just providing the data for the store colleagues to analyze and then make decisions on. There was a real push, or an attempt certainly, to try and make that reporting also provide the answers, if you like, the guidance on what steps to take, which is a real evolution of store reporting, from straight data in a table. The next step is present it in pretty graphs. The following step is, and these are the actions we want you to take as a result of this data.
Action-based was always the holy grail. Sometimes It was, I think, difficult with either the data points that exist or the subject of the data to come up with a tangible action. So my footfall is down, and therefore my conversion may be down. How much of that, if we think about a supermarket environment, can you control? Because actually the offers, the marketing, the branding is all done centrally and driven down. So can I affect footfall? Maybe not. I can affect conversion, because even if less people are coming in, I can still sell to more people. So it was information rich, data poor. At that point, I think there was a hunger for information. Data and insight came later.
Yes, I agree. Yes, absolutely right. And it's funny. I know, as I say, we were certainly talking about the idea of having sort of action-based reporting, but the reality is it's very hard to put that in place, as you say, without the right number of data points and the right data points, but also I think without the appetite being there in store. And you mentioned the phrase a second ago, actually, about empowering the store colleagues. And that's exactly what you want to do, because we all know that if you've got empowered store colleagues and they have, the information that they need and all the tools to hand, then they will do a great job in retail. That in itself, it motivates them. But of course, if you start to take that away by saying, to use your phrase, the system knows best, as you start to take that power away, it leaves them with less to do, less space to think and be creative. And sadly, then I think you the longer term effects of that are a more demoralized workforce, poorer customer service, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's why action-based reporting just hasn't really gone anywhere, because the appetite in store is not really there for it, even though it seems like a great place to get to.
Politically incorrect now, but the show that was probably around that time quite popular, Little Britain, there was the sketch with Computer Says No. And I think there was a lot of that when people started to deflect responsibility back to solutions of, well, this is what the computer says and this is what the computer doesn't say. And then you've got a group of people that, certainly in a store environment, when you're leading a team, agree or disagree with that. It's very easy just to say, well, computer says no. Not my decision, nothing to do with me. I don't understand any of the data that goes in. All I'm told is what comes out of that is what we've got to do or not do. Computer says no. So maybe a bad series to quote in the current climate, but I think people will get the gist.
I agree. And isn't it funny as well, one of the things that I start to see through the research I did coming out around that sort of 2015 period was the mention of showrooming. And it's I just noticed on a few articles, I'm not saying that's when it started, obviously it would have started before then, but this concept really started to gain ground around about 2015 time. Now we look back at it, we kind of take it for granted that that's how it works. But of course, it's this concept of having your mobile device, walking around a retail store, and as you spot a product in that retail store, you then look it up online to see if you can get it for a better price. Or you might use actually your mobile device just to find out some additional information about that product that isn't available in store, which, that in itself is a poor thing. Now, what we found during that time was that our store colleagues were often less equipped than the consumers themselves being able to provide information on the products. And that was I think that was a really bad point for retail. Okay, it may not be the worst thing that's happened to retail, but I do think that was a real low point for retail when the technology existed. So there was a way to enabled our store colleagues to have the information at their fingertips. Everything was there, all the pieces were there, but what retail hadn't done was put them together in a format that made it easy to use in store and meant that our store colleagues could provide a better customer experience to the consumers in the store.
Yeah, it makes me think of two things there, really. One, that back to I've probably got in my phone better tech than the colleagues have got. I'm ahead of the game almost, which puts the colleagues on the back foot, not through no fault of their own, just through what they've been provided. So like you say, I can go into a store that sells TVs, I can look at the TVs, I can find a 55-inch one of the same brand, maybe a slightly different model number, which will bring me on to something else in a second, around the price. I can get it delivered free, so I don't have to cart it home. I know when it's coming. I don't have to potentially deal with a salesperson that's going to sell me a warranty. So there became a whole load of benefits of showrooming, if you like. It opened up choice. It certainly opened up price. And price became interesting because you then got into the debate of price promise.
Yes.
So everybody would do a price promise, but in the small print, they won't match anything online. So you kind of knowingly, to turn the John Lewis phrase on its head, you're knowingly overcharging me.
Yes.
And I remember there being some real big debates in the media and in all the retail press around a price promise should be a price promise. It should be universal. I get there's economies of scales for businesses that don't have bricks and mortar or work in a different way. But actually, I think there became a customer dissatisfaction of, I can see exactly the same telly, exactly the same model number, although it went through a phase of people having a 1 or a 7 or a digit on the end, so they didn't price match the exact same model because
indeed, yes.
So there were ways around it, as there always
of course.
But I think it became a customer dissatisfaction to say, well, I want to buy this telly. It's £500 here. Here's my £500, but I can get it for £475 online. I want to take it today. I want it today. I want to open it today. I want to watch football in the afternoon with the kids. Or we can't price match it because it's online.
Yes.
So you're happy for that, for the sake of £25, for that to walk out the shop.
Yes.
It became an irritation, I think, for lots of people. And I think it drove them to buy it online was the reality. If I can save £25, £50, £100, I'm going to do it. And if the trade-off for that is I have to wait 2 days, well, probably worth it, to be honest.
Yes, I completely agree. And that's why you've highlighted a point, actually, that I hadn't mentioned, but it totally supports my view of retail at that time, in that there was no lean, there was no agile approach. There were so many ways in which our store colleagues and the consumers ultimately could have been helped. There were much better solutions, and absolutely the solution was not to change the digit on the end to differentiate those product numbers. I mean, that was a kind of a workaround, but sadly not for the consumer's benefit. And I think this nicely brings us on to kind of the multi-channel, omni-channel discussion. But just before we get onto that, I remembered actually as you were talking that I remember being in New York around about 2012, and just after visiting NRF, and went into a store. It was a pharmacy store in New York. I saw there one of the store staff, one of the store employees, was using iPhone, and they were what they looked like. They were sort of taking some sort of picture of the fridges in that store. I thought, this is quite interesting. I wonder what they're doing there. They've probably got some app on there. It's maybe it's using image processing to identify which products are in, which ones are out, and he's sort of doing a stock take, the inventory. I thought this looks really quite cool, and it's a big chain as well. This pharmacy, so I wouldn't put it past them to have got this right. So I thought, well, I'll go and ask the guy and see what he's doing. And so I introduced myself and asked him to tell me more about it. And he said, no, I'm just literally taking pictures on my phone. And then I'll take those pictures out the back to the storeroom, and I'll kind of flick through them and see what I need to bring out to replenish the shelves. And it was a real low moment for me because I was really disappointed. I had high hopes. But sadly, doesn't it show you actually how our store colleagues, the store employees, find ways around these problems? The old way of doing that would have had, a piece of paper and a pen and just write down what you needed. He'd found a way that worked for him. And I think that's got to be, for me, the guidance for retailers, I'd say, is, when there's a need to overcome a problem in store, don't be afraid to allow your store staff to be inventive and creative within certain guidelines and parameters, of course, but don't forget to allow them to be creative, because as human beings, we are quite resourceful very often, and we will find ways to do a good job, to do a good turn. And this is one example of that, where you're taking pictures of the shelves. So yeah, and let's go back to the omni-channel, multi-channel piece, because that really started to build in momentum over these last 10 years. And there's no question that some have done it better than others. I would say as well, I don't know what your view is. I think initially there was a bit of confusion around the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel. What's your view on that, Simon?
People didn't know the difference, did they, between the two, and it became a buzzword and a company latched onto one or the other, and that became their phrase for saying it. And I'm still not sure everybody quite gets it today, if I'm honest.
Indeed.
Certainly from an omni-channel point of view. The bit that strikes me reflecting back on that time was, I think people thought they were doing omni-channel in a multi-channel way. So there was no links between the channels. There were multiple channels, but they were all siloed.
Yes. Yeah.
It's for me my reflection on that time, and it moved, and some of them moved very quickly to join those and connect those. But it was difficult at the start. Is my reflection. We don't stock that here. Sorry, you can't bring it back. I bought it from you online. Yeah, but we don't range that one. Okay, but as a customer, I don't know that. All I want to know is I bought it from the logo that's above the door. You were quite happy to take my money, and now I've got to go and do something different to take it back.
Yeah,
challenges it brought operationally for colleagues at the front line to deal with that just were those unconscious thoughts when people were putting it together.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it was a real mixed bag, wasn't it? Of some people declaring they were clearly multi-channel, but striving for omni-channel. Others claiming they're omni-channel and clearly barely multi-channel. I mean, it was quite a disappointing view again, I guess, of retail, and how they really hadn't embraced what customers really wanted at that time. And now it was disappointing, but I must say that from the inside, I can tell you at that point, the challenges that we faced as retailers were absolutely vast. I mean, the connectivity between different systems that had always existed in isolation, always happily executed every day in isolation, the things that they were designed to do. Well, now we were being told that they had to speak to each other in very non-technical terms. And the reality is that they were never designed to do that very often. And what you're really talking about is kind of building a glue between them, which was immensely complex. And they were, essentially these systems were pretty much speaking in a different language to each other. Again, not a very technical way of describing it, but it really was like you needed some sort of translator that sat in between them to be able to handle that. Now, for the bigger retailers at that time, the challenge was the amount of data that would need to be translated in both directions, because of course, it had to be in both directions in order to synchronize both of those systems at every transaction. It wasn't sufficient to just run those in batches overnight. The challenges were huge, and there's no question that it was going to be difficult. Omnichannel was always going to be difficult. But I do think, and what I do like about retail at that time, is that it had this idea, it recognized that omnichannel was where consumers wanted retail to be. So it doesn't matter which touch point, as you say, the logo's above the door, that's the same logo as the one that was on the website. Why doesn't this just work? And it just seems like such a simple request from a consumer's perspective. And I will say that I'm very pleased to see that even at the beginning of this year, what's been recognised again by Gartner is that omnichannel is still being strived for in retail. So it's still something that retail leaders are coming back to Gartner and saying we are still pushing for an omnichannel retail experience for consumers.
I don't know if that will morph slightly with what's happened in the world over the past few months in terms of more self-fulfill, so pushing some of that back to stores.
Yes.
Because the data's there, the stock file accuracy hopefully is there. So actually, how can we occupy more colleagues and push some of that workload back? So I think omnichannel remain. I'm not sure what the new word for it will be. There'll clearly be a next evolution in it, I'm sure. But that whole fulfill from store piece, I think, will gather momentum as they look to push that workload into the right place or to fill some ineffective time.
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. I do think I think that's the key, actually, that you mentioned there. I think it's going to be somehow bringing it back to the stores and empowering. So using that term again, so empowering the store colleagues to be able to deliver great customer service, a great customer experience to consumers. And I think that's it. I do think that what retailers are going to have to do is find ways, innovative ways, to use their store estate to build out that experience. And in fact, one of the terms that's used as you kind of look forward, a new term that's being coined now is this multi-experience, which is I'm going to quote this word for word from the Gartner report. So, multi-experience replaces technology literate people with people literate technology, and that's quite a paradigm shift to get your head around. It's really about saying that the technology that we've always put into at the hands of our consumers, the hands of our store colleagues over all these years has been very functionally based. And you've had to sort of be trained. And to your point earlier on about no one ever taught you how to download an app onto your iPhone. It's because you didn't need to, because it was in some way, it was much more, I wouldn't say it was completely, but it was much more sort of human centric, if you like, people literate technology than the other way around. And you didn't have to be a technology genius to know how to do it or work out how to do it. Although I must admit, the older I get, things are becoming more complex. I don't doubt that one day I'll be needing my children to do the equivalent to programming the video recorder. Although obviously I don't have one of those today.
Yeah, it's on its way, isn't it? It's that.
It is.
It's that where's Flappy Bird's gone from the App Store moment of I don't know how to solve the problem now, and then your son comes along and says, "Oh, this is how you can still get it." So, okay, I'm falling behind clearly now.
But isn't it interesting as well how, and just sort of looking forward a little bit now as we bring the conversation to sort of present day, you see how lots more social media platforms are coming through seemingly from nowhere. So, TikTok is the kind of the flavor of the month. In fact, at the beginning of this year, I've not found more recent data on this, but at the beginning of this year, TikTok were reporting something like 150 million active users worldwide. And that is, in my mind, that's absolutely staggering. Have you given it a try yet, Simon?
See, that's one of the things that I'm not quite sure about. That's where my age is probably showing now. I downloaded it, looked at it and thought, am I really going to video myself dancing? Because I kind of can't quite work out what it's for, if I'm being really honest. No disrespect to TikTok, but I'm probably of that age where I'm showing my age. It makes me feel old because I look at it and think, me dancing up some stairs or doing something like that probably is what the world wants to see. Is the reality, but it's probably the same for things like House Party. I know they have driven users from a different mechanism, if you like, from the COVID stuff. Yes. And again, that whole interaction piece, driving users, different ways of doing things. It's amazing once it becomes viral.
Yes. Well, what I'd say at this point is take a look at when we're not sure about what TikTok's going to bring the retail world. Take a look at what's happened with platforms like Instagram, like Facebook. Twitter had a go at it, but it hasn't really come through in the same way. No doubt there'll be something else that will come from that team in the coming years. But if you look at what they've done on Facebook and Instagram, they've really been able to take something that started its life as a purely social platform. It was really about sharing something with other people out there that had a similar interest to you, or whether it's dancing to funny clips of music or whatever it might be. In the Instagram world, it was just about, sharing beautiful pictures online, whether that was your lunch or a sunset or whatever it might be. On Facebook, it was about connecting with your social network much more broadly and sharing details online that probably only really your closest friends would have previously known. But now, obviously, this information is much more widely accessible. Look at those social platforms, and they've been able to monetize advertising in a way that I don't think anyone ever thought would be possible. You look at what's possible now through the Instagram platform in terms of retail, and look at, beyond that, the extension of that, when you look at how the influencers community has grown. And then even within that, now you've got the segments, you've got your kind of influencers of old, which would have, a few million followers, maybe the sort of the Kardashians and the like. And then at the other end, you've now got this newly kind of established growth of influencers called micro-influencers, which are all about having, just maybe a few thousand followers, but the richness of their connections with their followers is much, much deeper and that relationship is much deeper than what you would have with some of those really big stars. So those micro-influencers, which are essentially an extension of retail and the advertising that's going on those platforms, I think is a new and exciting chapter in social media. So now bring that forward to TikTok. I can see that today it seems like it has sort of, very little purpose to it. And I must admit, I agree with you on that. But in the future, the potential of that platform is going to be enormous, and that's where it's going to get quite exciting. I think if we were to fast forward this podcast another 10 years, I think we'll be looking at TikTok in a very different light.
The likelihood is an Instagram of this world may acquire it, and you find that consolidation, don't you? Or like you say, they've invented their own subtle version of TikTok. They all morph or start to morph the social platforms into one another. Based on the ideas that come through and what's popular at the time. The interesting thing on Insta was, I read the other day, there was I won't name her, there was a UK call her celebrity that's on daytime television, and she was reportedly being paid £15,000 per Instagram sponsored content tweet just because of the sales increase in the volume that it drives when she does it.
Wow, that's crazy. That is incredible, isn't it?
And you're talking... No disrespect to her, you're talking nowhere near A-list.
No.
You then put it in the realms of the Kardashians and
yeah,
what have you, and you think to monetize some of these things with the right people, and it's good now they put it, it's a sponsored content. So David Beckham's drinking his Hague gin and it says sponsored content. But actually, it'd be really interesting to see how that correlates to the sales, because they're clearly willing to put the money behind it.
Yeah, and don't forget how the likes of celebrity TV chefs influenced the sellout of products in stores when they were creating something amazing on TV one evening. So you'd the likes of Delia Smith. I mean, I remember this being, goodness, this is a blast from the past, but when she would be preparing something online, she'd say, and so the thing you need to get for all your cooking is this product, and then suddenly the shelves of Sainsbury's and Tesco and Waitrose would be cleared because everyone was rushing out to buy this thing that Delia Smith had recommended. And that was kind of the start of that influencer style. At the time, we didn't really have a name for it, but that stuff was happening back then. And Delia hasn't been on TV for quite some time, cooking things that I'm aware of anyway. Maybe on the channels you watch, Simon, I don't know.
No, not cooking. I think the last time she was on telly, it was in the middle of a football pitch.
Yes.
That's probably not her greatest moment to reflect.
No, indeed not. Indeed not.
Probably most humorous. In terms of reflections then on that period and where we are today and what you think of the future, if it was a school report, what would your conclusions be?
Wow, this is going to sound awful, but I think I'd give it a B-, and
okay.
And I'll tell you why, because there was so much hope there and so much expectation around what could be achieved. And sadly, I think what actually came out of that was, yes, there were changes. Yes, there were improvements. Of course there were, but not to the scale that was talked about, not to the scale that was anticipated. And that for me, I think, and I know that lots of the retailers have changed the way they work now. So I'm not going to name any here, but I know they've changed the way they work fundamentally to be much more lean and agile, which is what I mentioned a little earlier in this podcast, because they've recognized that you can't continue to work in the old ways, can't line up your project and it's going to take 18 months to deliver, because in the first 6 months, things are going to change, and you have to be able to respond to that as a retailer. And I think that if there are retailers out there that haven't yet made that leap, they haven't moved to more agile ways of working, then today is the best time for them to do that, and they really ought to get on with it more quickly than perhaps they have done. I mean, there are lots of things I could talk about in terms of what the future looks like, and there are terms like blockchain, there are terms like, augmented reality and virtual reality, which obviously have been buzzwords over the past 10 years. And I do see some of those things coming through a lot more in the next 10 years. Sadly, I don't think they'll be to the scale that is being talked about. And, likewise with autonomous things. So, autonomous delivery robots, I just don't think that's going to take off as much as we might think it could do. Delivery drones, again, I think what we'll see there is that those drones are going to be siloed into a particular niche where they work very, very well. And the one that springs to mind is about delivery of medicines to very remote places. So I can see that working very, very well. I don't see it. I don't see drones delivering parcels into our back gardens. That's, I just don't see that happening in the next 10 years, not en masse anyway. This is going to be very interesting to listen back to this in 10 years' time, isn't it? Now I've made that declaration. The other thing that we should mention is IoT. And I don't know, do you see much of that going on? You're very close to stores very often in the work that you do. Do you hear much of that mentioned? Do you see much happening in that space?
Not currently.
No.
I think it's one of those things that feels like it's a way off and then it'll be here before we know it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. If you look at kind of the art of the possible with IoT, there's an awful lot that's going on out there. I found a very interesting solution that uses self-edge cameras. Self-edge cameras, they're very small devices, and they are monitoring the shelves opposite them. So they're looking at the stock that's on the shelves. Now, obviously, you can understand how replenishment could be vastly improved with that type of technology. But I will go back to the whole use of the Bluetooth beacons around store as a way of sort of, tracking where your consumers are, and then being able to push perhaps, coupons, adverts, promotions, that type of thing to your consumers via the mobile app as they kind of connect, as their mobile device, as their phone connects with the Bluetooth beacon in that part of the store. And that's really not happened. And the reason it's not happened is because I think that any technology that requires you to have, like in a big store, several hundreds or even thousands of units dispersed around that store, I think is off to a bit of a failed attempt. It's really, for me, not something that was going to work particularly well. I mean, look at sort of electronic shelf edge labels. Certainly you see a lot of that on the continent, and certainly in smaller stores you see a lot of that. But it's taken a really long time to gain any traction. Even though that technology is really quite cheap these days, it's really not gone out as quickly as everyone expected it to.
No, I agree. I'm always amazed in countries like Portugal where pretty much every supermarket's got it. Then you come home and think, why can't we do that? But I know the cost of ownership is different on scale and all those things.
Yes.
So a B minus, then it's always the hope that kills you.
Yes.
Back to when we talked about aspirations in 2010. Yeah, so England lost 4-1 to Germany in the World Cup in that year. So the hope did kill us. It was the game, for those that remember, when Frank Lampard's goal was miles over the line, and we should have been, I think, 2-1 up at that point. So some things change and some things don't. Let's see. We will revisit this in maybe next year and see how far we got and how close we came with some of the bits, and then and maybe a couple
absolutely.
Of years.
I would add, though, that, and I should perhaps know better given what I've just said, but I'm actually really hopeful for the next 10 years. I think there's quite a lot that will come through. It probably won't be in those areas that I've mentioned in around kind of blockchain, and I do think AI will start to pick up, but it won't be quite to the level we expected. AR and VR, again, will pick up, but it won't be quite to what we expected. But I do think there's a lot of good stuff coming. And I do think that more agile ways of working, which are coming in, and the retailers have been doing that over the past few years, I do think that's going to really push us. What impact the pandemic will have had on retail is really hard to know. And I guess what they'll have to do is just be very receptive to the way in which consumer behavior changes. There's certainly going to be a push to more online. ordering. I think certainly even my local Tesco, I know they've increased slots significantly for online deliveries, and so there's certainly going to be a lot more of that going on. But I do wonder how the next 10 years will look. Retailers don't embrace those kind of much more agile approach to ways of working.
I agree. Whatever it is that comes out of the other end, I think the agile sprint way of working is the way to facilitate that. To get rid of the stuff quickly without a huge investment that doesn't work, and to back on and refine the stuff that does work or surprises you. And that way of working, needs to stick. So, Michael, it's been a pleasure having you on. I really enjoyed this one. I'm sure we could carry on for another couple of hours on this one. Final question. What's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given so far in your career?
It was while I was at Tesco. I know I've mentioned Tesco a lot, but it was really quite formative on me as an individual and on my career. And it was a piece of advice that came from a conversation at a leaders' dinner. I won't reveal much more than that because I need to protect the innocent. It came from a leaders' dinner, and in the conversation, the most senior person at the table said, so, when you do last get into store? And I said, I don't really get into store very much these days. Very, very busy in the office, lots and lots going on and big projects to deliver and all sorts of innovation and oh my goodness. And he said, well, would you like to get into store more often? I said, absolutely. If only I could find the space in my diary, then I would absolutely get into store more often. And he said, oh, right, okay. He said, who manages your diary then? And it kind of dawned on me. It's like, that will be me. And so my best bit of advice from business was prioritize the things that are really important. And to identify the things that are really important, you might just have to take a step back from everything that's troubling you in your day to day. The important stuff in retail goes on in stores and online. And if you are in the office and busy, got your head down working on delivering your project, then yes, of course that's important, but you're kind of missing the point of retail. So my best bit of advice is do the things that are important, and if you're in retail, get out to stores and get online, see what's going on.
No, absolutely. That's where you see the end result of your work and get some really valuable feedback. Again, it's all those conscious bits that you think about, but it's the unconscious bits from end users and colleagues, customers alike. The bits that blindside you because you think, why didn't I think of that? And that's
Absolutely.
that's the gold dust. And the quicker you get that, I think the more you can circumvent things further downstream. But no, enjoyed that. Where is the best place for people to find you, Michael, if they want a further conversation or talk about your new business?
Sure. Yeah. So you can find my website at parkerveese.com. That's PARKERVEESE.com. And you can just email me at michael@parkerveese.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. So do look for me on there. Just search for my name and you'll find me. If that doesn't turn me up, then put Tesco in as well. And that will definitely get me. I'm also on Twitter. So MD Grange on Twitter. There is another Michael Grange who I connected with recently. He's much more well known than I am, and he's a sports commentator in the US and had grown a fantastic lockdown beard. So he's I connected with him recently to praise his efforts. But you'll soon see that that's not me, because everything he talks about is sport. That's not really what I'm into. If it's retail, then you'll find me.
Cool. And we'll put all the links in the notes when the podcast goes out, so people have to click through. Brilliant.
Wonderful.
Appreciate your time, Michael.
Thank you for your time, Simon. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Take care.